All right, here, number 21 for civics questions that are worth asking. This one's all about gerrymandering. What is gerrymandering and why does it matter? Well, as a government and civics teacher, I try to spend some time convincing the kids that civics isn't just about the Constitution test they have to pass. It's about understanding how political power works and how we have rights and responsibilities, and then ultimately the rules of self-government. So when we look at today's question of what is gerrymandering and why does it matter, what we look at is that gerrymandering is the manipulation of voting districts to give one political party or a group or a special interest an unfair advantage. And that definition is important because redistricting itself is not automatically bad, because district lines have to be redrawn from time to time. Now, in the past, it's always been after the census has been taken. And the reason why we want redistricting and district lines redrawn is that populations change and people move and communities grow or shrink or shift. And so after each census, states redraw congressional and legislative districts so that representation can reflect changes in population. That's what redistricting is. And then for Congress, we also look at reapportionment of the House, where we assign seats in the states and stuff. But anyway, gerrymandering is what happens when that process is manipulated. Instead of drawing districts to fairly represent people, map makers draw districts to help certain candidates or political parties or, like I said, special interest groups take hold or win power. So in simple terms, redistricting is the process. Gerrymandering is the abuse of the process. Now, there are two common techniques people often talk about when it comes to gerrymandering. There's packing and there's cracking. Packing means placing as many voters from one group or party as possible into a small number of districts. They may win those districts by huge margins, but their influence is weakened elsewhere. Cracking means splitting a group of voters across several districts so they don't have enough voting strength to win in any of them. And both strategies are designed to effectively dilute political power. Now, this is why gerrymandering is important. It can make elections less competitive. It can allow politicians to choose their voters instead of voters choosing their politicians. And it can make some communities feel like their voices don't count. It protects incumbents. It can reward some extreme candidates. And it can also make citizens believe the outcome was decided before election day ever happens. And so then, of course, this would lead on to affect representation. Imagine two maps with the same number of voters and the same overall political balance. One map might produce several competitive districts. Another might produce mostly safe districts where one party is almost guaranteed to win. But the voters didn't change. The lines just did. And that is the power of redistricting. Now, not every strangely shaped district is automatically a gerrymander. I know if you look at the state of Illinois, you could say woofda. It's definitely a gerrymandered state. Districts, technically, you're supposed to keep the districts to be three things: contiguous, compact, and equal in population. And districts can look unusual for legitimate reasons. Map makers try to keep certain communities together, follow county or city boundaries. They try to comply with the Voting Rights Act, which is kind of up in the air anyway. And then they also want to account for population equality, or they want to reflect geography. Sometimes people live in patterns that naturally make fair maps difficult. So shape alone does not prove gerrymandering. But when lines are drawn mainly to lock in a partisan advantage or to weaken certain voters or to protect certain political power, then citizens should be paying attention. Gerrymandering can happen at different levels. People often talk about congressional districts, but it also happens with state legislative districts as well. In some places, local districts for county boards, city councils, school boards, and other bodies can also shape representation. And that means gerrymandering is not just a national issue. It can affect state and local government as well. There is a difference between partisan gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering. Partisan gerrymandering is drawing the lines to benefit a political party. Racial gerrymandering involves using a race to improperly draw districts or to weaken the voting power of certain racial groups. Now, the legal rules around these issues can be complicated, but the civil concern is pretty straightforward. And that is, do district lines help people receive fair representation? Do they manipulate representation to protect power? And that's really kind of the key question here. Because if the rules are written to make competition less meaningful, then citizens may still vote, but their choices may be heavily shaped before they've ever seen the ballot. And that doesn't mean every losing candidate was cheated. It doesn't mean that every district map is corrupt. It doesn't mean that every safe district is automatically unfair. But it does mean district lines are a major part of how power works. And citizens should understand who draws those lines, what rules they follow, how transparent the process is, and whether the public really has a meaningful voice. Now, some states will use state legislatures to draw maps. Some will use nonpartisan commissions or advisory bodies or backup commissions. Different systems have different strengths and weaknesses, and so therefore no method is truly perfect. But the one important thing here is that transparency does matter, and you need to have clear rules and public input, and then legal accountability. All those happen to matter. Now, you may ask, why doesn't the Supreme Court take on gerrymandering, or why doesn't Congress? I really think that since members of Congress tend to benefit from it, it really wouldn't be a popular bill to present. I think the Supreme Court just, no thank you. There's certain topics they really don't want to take part in. You think about things like gun control too. I think the Supreme Court's like, nah, that's a little icky. We don't want to touch it. And gerrymandering, I think, is one of those. Now, why does it matter? Okay. It is the manipulation of district lines to gain political advantage. And it matters because representation is not only shaped by who votes. It's shaped by how voters are grouped together. And so the real civic question is not who just wins an election. The real question comes down to is whether the system gives voters a fair chance to choose their representatives. And that's why gerrymandering matters. And I thought today that was a civics question that was worth asking. All right. If you thought this was important, here's the shameless plug. Please share it out to folks. I know these are kind of lengthy, so I don't know that I could make them into 30-second sound bites because that's just, I'm windy like that. I tend to probably provide too much information, but that's just a flaw in my character, I guess. I can't change who I am right now. Anyway, thanks for watching and hanging around, and we'll catch you down the line for the next one.